This is a short video just talking about what the other things we're going to use the land for, and that is really to do with growing fruit, growing vegetables, and just how we're going to plan that into what we're doing. Because you might start thinking, oh, that's a gardening thing, that's the last thing I'm going to think about, and really it's one of the first things we're trying to at least know what we're going to do and how that fits into the plan, because with these kind of things they take years to grow, to mature, to properly establish. So the sooner you get it started, the sooner you start to get the benefits of it, because it could take you years if you're not careful before you even start doing it, in which case it'll be years before you get anything out of it. So it's one of the first things we've been looking at, and so we looked at fruit and we looked at vegetables. So if we talk about fruit, first of all, really what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to get out of that.
Yeah, so to determine what fruits grow, you have to find what's called the hardiness zone, where the land falls. And this land we have bought falls in zone 6B. And as far as where you want to grow or buy fruit trees from, your best bet is a good local nursery, because they keep the variety
That works locally.
that works locally.
6B is subtropical. It
No,
is.
no,
It's on Wikipedia.
it's subtropical.
Yeah, that's what it says.
Good Lord.
That's what it's rated at. But it gets cold winters.
And
But it's basically hot, humid summers and cold winters.
yeah, and trees obviously take up a lot of space. And before you put trees down, you want to make sure that you do not need that access area for anything else. So where we are putting trees down is potential that it'll kind of be in the way of big trucks which will come in for drilling the well and putting down the septic tank and leach field. So we have to keep in mind that we finish that work first before we start putting trees down, or we make sure there is a pathway which is large enough for some of this equipment to come through. And we'll be meeting up with the septic guys to understand, what kind of clearance they need.
Yeah. So we found a good nursery quite close to the land, which is which sells quite a lot of trees and berry plants, these kind of things, and they gave us some quite good advice. So this time of year, which is early autumn, really just now, they had almost nothing in stock. They had a few trees sitting about, but basically said that if you want to be planting next year, you have to order them before October this year. So we'd have to place an order, let's say in October this year, and they'll be ready to deliver to us about March, April time next year. And they're beholden to their suppliers about what's actually available. So they might have 3 or 4 varieties of apples, pears, whatever, peaches, these kind of things, but you have to in some ways make your choices around what they think will be available and then what actually is available. There's an interesting thing as well, some garden centres can actually have potted trees in pots for 2 or 3 years before they're actually sold. So I think you've got to get to know your garden centre, get some trust in them about how the trees have been kept. If they've got good soil, you can tell by the weight of the tree if it's got good root structure and soils, that kind of thing, and how it's been kept over winter, that kind of stuff, if it's going to come back. So I think it's having that relationship and the trust with the supplier, with the nursery supplier of these things.
Yeah, and once the tree is sent to the land, you should preferably put it into the ground fairly quickly, within a matter of days, for 2 reasons. One, you don't want the tree dying, and second, you don't want someone walking off with it. Also bear in mind that when you first put the tree down, you have to water it well every day for the first 2 weeks. What that means is, if this is raw land which is remote, you have to be able to your schedule should be such that you can come to that land to water the trees on a regular basis. Yes, you can set up timed watering and things like that, but it all depends on, again, whether your well is dug, whether you have some kind of drip irrigation with timers set up. In our case, we might have a well dug, but we wouldn't be able to leave our generator there running. And even if we did go and pump water, you have to pump water worth 1 week into a tank. So think of all that logistics, but you're investing this kind of money and it takes 5 years. So be very careful. And if you have to spend a few $100s more in paying a good gardener or someone to come and look at it, plan for it such that you don't fail to water it on a regular basis. So the first 2 weeks you have to water every day, and then you can water it twice a week for the next few weeks, and then kind of taper off. But bear that in mind. So you do not want to plant 2 trees now and then 2 trees in the spring of next year. We thought of putting a few plants now, but then what we realized was we are not going to be driving up and down to water just 2 trees. So we have to plan for that in our schedule.
Yeah. So in the space of land that we're principally looking at putting trees down, it's roughly the footprint of a normal townhouse, I'd say, that we're looking at. And there have been some buildings on that land before, so it's a good idea to do this, just sort of try and dig in with a little fork or shovel or something just to see what's under the ground. And Sat told us that it was very stony actually. We could barely get the fork to all the way through the ground. So, we need some kind of auger, some sort of gas-powered drill, to get through all this. It didn't look like concrete set, but it was definitely not something you could easily dig through. And advice we got from the nursery was, that just pace yourself putting these things in. If you're going out there planning to put 100 trees in or something, just know how long that's going to take, because you can get trees supplied in pots, effectively in pots with soil, but you can also get trees supplied that are with the roots bare. And there are advantages and disadvantages of each, but if you get them with the roots bare, then as soon as you get them to your land, if you're not planting them immediately, like I'd say 24, 48 hours, you need to do something to really protect the roots and do it that way. So it's a risk doing it that way, and so for us, I think we'll be going for the potted ones, which are, there is a, we have to plant these things out, but if they sat in their pots for a few weeks, it wouldn't be a major disaster as long as you keep them watered and
but you have to go back to water them.
Yeah, you do, but they're not going to die if they stay in the pot for.
And so we have to think about what fruits we want and to be a bit flexible, because a good nursery would tell you that some of these are not available this year, while you can always get a bad quality tree. So we have been lucky where we managed to find a very good
eligible,
reliable nursery owner who spoke to us at length about all these things. And you have to do your part where you're flexible. And so we are going to give a list of trees based on what we find will grow in the 6B area. Needless to say, we are going to be putting out a lot of peach trees, because we know peach trees grow well in this area, and that kind of works its way to the name of peach Cobb-Lair. But we'll be making a big list and giving it to him, and then work with him to see what's available. So he might not be able to give all the trees in one shot. He will give us what's available, and then we'll work with him to see if we can use something else which is available.
But we're thinking about between 20 and 30 trees going down.
And berries.
So we'll probably have the trees anyway in roughly one area, then a few scattered out in a couple of other areas. We learnt an interesting thing about the land, that it had previously been a fruit orchard, but must have been years ago, because there's nothing left. Any signs of that now. And
when they give us the trees, they are going to give us detailed instructions, but you have to remember that deer can destroy trees, And so we have to put stakes down and a little fence. So you have to plan for all these things around each tree. So talking about fence, the same problem is there for a vegetable garden.
You know, it could be better just putting one fence around all the trees instead of a little fence around each tree.
We could do that too, yeah. So it depends on how we are getting the trees in.
Yeah, but if you know where they're going.
Yeah. If it's all going in one place,
Yeah, if principally there's one area.
yes, we could do that.
And then even if it's, because apparently with the wire you put round, it doesn't have to be a tight mesh, it can just be 3 or 4 wires that, you know, make it hard for the deer to get their
Yeah.
heads in towards the trees, and so
Yeah.
it's enough to put them off.
So the trees you're protecting against deer, but the vegetable garden you're trying to protect against many other critters, rabbits,
Mice.
mice. So that fencing is going to be a bit more complex, and we would be, again, you can find details about how to do vegetable garden fencing, but what we are telling is we have to plan for getting the poles, the fencing material, and do all that work. And these are the kind of work we can do in winter before the ground freezes, but and be ready for next year for the vegetable garden, which brings me to what's called the county extension program. Every county has a county extension program where you can have free resources and classes for home gardening, small farmers, and it's fantastic.
It's often tied into the local university or college, agricultural colleges, where they, you know, they provide a lot of the technical skill that feeds into these things. They're obviously county funded from that,
Yeah.
you know, to extend it out like that, but they can provide knowledge, you know, extremely detailed knowledge about different plants for that local area, for techniques, for methods of, you know, really to try and teach people from market gardeners to small farmers, these kind of things, or people with no real experience in the area or in the subject, and it's
So
across the board.
yeah, they cover everything from what you have to grow, pesticide, fertilizer, how to pick it. They even have things for picking and canning.
How to look after bees.
Yes, and for us, it is the county extension is connected with University of Maryland's horticultural department, and that was another thing you have to time. So we have looked into that, and we are in touch with the program, and we will be signing up for their program next year. So Jan through April, they're going to run classes, which will be a few hours a week, and you get extensive knowledge about how to start and run a small farm. We are hoping to talk to them about where we can get seeds, but as far as seeds is concerned, Ianto Evans, with whom we learnt under for the Cobb Cottage company. So we spent 10 days in Oregon with Ianto Evans Cobb Cottage company, and he mentioned about something called a seed exchange. Unfortunately, Maryland and Pennsylvania are trying to clamp down on seed exchanges. But a seed exchange is just a place where individuals and small growers can go and exchange seeds for no money. It's just small growers who are interested in growing. And that's a good place. Cooperatives are also a good place. We don't know much. We are hoping to dig out all this information when we go to the small farms course with the county extension department next year.
Yeah. And that just brings us on to the forest conservation. So the local county again have got various programs, and some of these are state programs as well. And each region, I guess, in the country will be slightly different how they do this. But here they've got programs to try and promote the conservation and protection of forestry areas for obvious reasons. And so what they provide are programs where if you become on your land, if you agree to conserve whatever forestry is there, if it's above a certain acreage, and I think it's something like 3 acres or whatever it is, if it's above a certain acreage that's covered in forest, then you basically get a tax break for minding it and not cutting any of it down. And as part of that, they've got a forestry conservation officer who will come round with you and look at your land, I guess, to assess it, to make sure it's actually a forest, not just one tree or something. And then he will also come and he will explain to you what's going on in your piece of land, about the trees, their condition, which ones are natural to the area, which ones aren't, how to conserve it, how to manage it, and how to best look after it, which ones are invasive species that they may not want you to keep. They may actually earmark trees that they say, look, this is an invasive species, it's not a natural local. It's some of these are very aggressive and they'll push out the indigenous species, and so it's a very valuable process to go through. And so we're going to schedule for the conservation officer to come out and to come round with us. Really, we're using it as part to learn about what we have there and the condition, because there's been at least one tree on the land that was identified by the seller, and it's an ash tree that has got some bug in it that's killed it. And so it's understanding that kind of thing and the best way of managing and protecting and looking after. So because we're not all out conservationists, but we're also not out there to try and cut anything down. We're trying to work around whatever's there.
We do want to keep the forest, and we are very much interested in learning about those trees. We have very little knowledge, and the officer will actually walk around and identify all the trees, and we want to be prepared where when he walks around we are thinking of some method of tagging everything so we know what's what. When we were walking through the land, actually many lands in this area, we have found black walnuts, and turns out many orchards typically do grow black walnuts, and they take years to grow, and that's a wonderful resource. So things like that we do want to mark, tag, and figure out a nice way of tagging these, and we'll be talking to the officer soon to figure out what's a good time for him to come. Is it now when there are still leaves on the trees, or is it a bit later after the leaves have fallen and it's easier to walk through the land? So we hope to talk to him soon and arrange for something, and that's fantastic, and that's a resource we always have. So I don't know if you have to pay him anything, but even if you have to pay him something, I would love to have him come on a regular basis, maybe once a year, help us and walk through the land.
So that's something that we're probably going to do, whether we meet the criteria, whatever that is, for being forest conservators or whatever the expression is, but then is less important than at least understanding what we're working with and what we've got and how best to look after it, I think.
Now, what about fertilizer and pesticide control? We are going to learn all that in the course, but what we are going to do is when we clear the land, there is a lot of overgrowth, and we need to clear that area where we build the house. We will be making areas where we will compost all of this, and the compost of just green discards and weeds can be out in the open. Eventually, once we live in the land, we will be doing composting of kitchen material, which you kind of want it in a more enclosed kind of setup, because that can attract rodents. And we are currently composting here at home with the red wriggler worms, so we'll probably transfer that once we have a working vegetable garden, and build out a composting bin with discarded pallets and things like that. But for now, we are going to collect all the weeds and stuff we clear in the land.
Another thing as well we want to try and get are is manures. So things like horse manure or cow manure. And there are two reasons for that. One is particularly horse manure is extremely good for making sure the veggie gardens and stuff all grow, and the trees and stuff get the good nutrients, because they're good fertilizers to use. And also for the buildings we do, the earthen plasters often use some kind of, whether it's horse dung, cow dung, whatever, just because of their contents. And this will be a subject of a later video on how we do all that stuff, but basically it's part of the mix. So if you think of plastering a whole house inside and out with that, you need quite a lot of dung. And so it's not needed immediately, but it's something we want to start collecting up and having in a sort of heap And it will help with the rotting down of with the green matter as well. Well,
Now, what was the other thing? Yes, we have taken
Oh,
a couple of videos in the Ag Research Center, right?
the other thing about that is quite often you can get the dung for nil cost.
Yeah. So we were, at one point when we were waiting in the land for the seller's agent or the well digger to come and, talk to us, we had an hour to kill. So we were driving around the neighborhood and looking and we were getting all excited when we saw horses and cows, because we were like, that's where we can get manure from, for all this. And actually cow manure is much better. The fiber content in that is much better for plasters. Horse manure is much better for fertilizing. So what was the other thing I was talking about? I just started something. Oh yes. So what we found was the county extension runs the small farms program, which we hope to attend, and turns out it runs it in this thing called an ag reserve, which was 15 minutes from our house, and we didn't know about it. And that's why we took a couple of our videos. And they have a small garden which people in the community come and work on actively. And we walked through that garden and found some really interesting things. We saw flowers and herbs, and some of the flowers attracted bees. So that's the other thing about putting a vegetable garden is there are herbs which prevent certain pests or critters from approaching the garden. So you want to plant these in the perimeter of your vegetable garden in a smart way. Again, that's something we hope to learn more. If you put enough flowering plants, we can attract enough bees for pollinating our vegetables and fruits, and also to create honey, because we potentially hope to put beehives. And that's another piece of information we hope to get from the county extension. The Ag Reserve's vegetable garden also had something interesting. It had a couple of ponds, but it didn't have water being circulated. Instead, they had put fish and frogs to clean up the water and to aerate it. And we would like to understand how that works. So it'll be nice to have a small pond, not huge, it's just about the size of probably a bathtub. And you can easily, create that for a nice ambiance and put some water lilies and some plants in there. So that's another piece of information we
and how you avoid
get.
mosquitoes growing on it as well,
Exactly.
is to keep. I guess maybe the fish eat the mosquitoes.
Mm-hmm.
So that was it, I think, for fruit and veggies.
Yep. So each one of these we will tackle in detail. So there'll be a time when we start working the vegetable garden. You'll see us do everything.
Stop being armchair farmers.
Yeah, at some point. That's it.